This is Gladstein.
Hi, everybody.
Great friend, and he works at the Human Rights Foundation, and he's going to tell us about their work. So,
thanks, Kate. Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for bringing me, allowing me to talk to you tonight. So at the Human Rights Foundation, we work with activists all across the world to promote civil and political rights and liberties. So on the map here, what you see are today's democracies, so places that are relatively free or fair. When I change the colors and you see the yellow and red countries, you start seeing some of the countries where, it's not so free. And right now, more than 3 billion people live under authoritarian governments. So basically, 43 out of every 100 humans on this planet live in a place like China or Cuba or Saudi Arabia, where there are no free elections, where one small group of men, and it's always men, it's never women, control everything, where there's no independent media like the New York Times, where we couldn't get together openly to discuss something like this without being afraid something might happen. So the issue of dictatorship, I guess just to start, is a lot more pressing, urgent, and universal than a lot of people might think. I want to spend my time tonight talking about our North Korea work. I know you all focus on design and systems and social change in different ways, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the reality of life in this really dark corner of the world and share with you how some North Koreans that we know are using information and culture to bring some light to their country. And I'm hoping in the Q&A how we can discuss how to get some of you guys involved. When you look at the mainstream media narrative about North Korea today, it's usually about a crazy dictatorship stuck in the past, with eccentric leaders making nuclear threats and launching missiles into the sea, right? You might hear about Dennis Rodman, maybe, or about the Sony hack, or about the Kim family's love for cognac, or a fear of planes. But usually it's about weapons, really, really big weapons, and North Korea's military threats and drills. So since the media focuses on North Korea's military might, it's an incomplete picture. It's only based on what the Kim regime projects to the world. It's not, it's what they want us to see. So in reality, the government is a lot more fragile than you might think, and there's lots of change happening on the ground that's kind of a little invisible to most observers. So to get a more accurate view, we have to go beyond the propaganda and see what life is like for the 25 million North Korean people. The truth is that the government of the so-called Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, has been systematically violating the human rights of its people for more than 6 decades, starting in 1948 under the rule of the Kim dynasty. So Kim Il-sung reigned for 46 years, and then his son Kim Jong-il took over, and now his son Kim Jong-un has taken over. So the Kim family are considered gods among men. They are more important than your family, than your friends, than your colleagues, than even your loved ones. They have an epic cult of personality, where their likenesses appear everywhere in North Korea, on billboards, massive statues like these, and even in people's homes, where having their portraits on your wall is mandated by law. And it's mandated by law in terms of exactly how you have to hang the portrait and how big they are and how often they have to be visible to the people who come inside your house. This is a system built on lies, where the people are told that the South Koreans started the Korean War and that Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il lived like the normal people. But in reality, the North Koreans started the Korean War, and the Kims live and continue to live really extravagantly. So to give you an idea of how extravagantly, in a country where only 16% of households have what the UN considers adequate access to food, there are entire government departments just dedicated to trying to figure out how to prolong the life of one person, the dear leader. So in a country where 28% of the population is stunted due to malnutrition, more than $800 million were spent on the funeral of the late dictator. So today there's still an inner circle of regime officials who spend billions on themselves while the rest of the country starves. So led by the dictator Kim Jong-un, this inner circle does not allow for any independent journalism, any type of political opposition. There's no religious freedom in North Korea. There's no civil society. Election ballots have only one option, literally, Kim Jong-un. Free speech is illegal. Those who defy the Kim regime are tortured and rounded up in vast, city-sized concentration camps. I put this map up here just so you can kind of see where they are located. As many as 200,000 North Koreans, a country of 25 million, are jailed in these camps. They're called the Kwali-so, and they're kind of modeled on Stalin's gulags. With Google Maps, you can actually look at the gulags. Here's camp number 22, for example. What goes on inside is unspeakable. This is a drawing made by a North Korean defector who tried to describe the horror that he lived through. Inside the prison camps, children are clubbed to death, people are ripped apart by guards and left hanging for the rest of the inmates to watch decay, for example. The Kim dynasty sustains its power with a mix of ideology and fear. So the regime still publicly executes people in front of huge crowds to scare the population, and it forces people to spy on their friends and family. They use guilt by association as a deterrent. So if you get in trouble, not only do your parents get in trouble, but your children get in trouble too. They also employ what's called the Songbun system, which sorts people into different classes depending on their loyalty to the regime. So your class dictates what school you can attend, what kind of job you have, and what kind of life you can live. When you crush human potential in this way for so long, it has consequences. So today, South Korea, obviously, as you know, is the land of Samsung, LG, Daewoo, Hyundai. You know, its high-tech innovation and internet speeds are legendary. But in North Korea, almost no one even owns a car. Only 10% of the population even owns a refrigerator. So the difference in per capita income between South and North Korea is bigger than any other two neighboring countries in the world today. Electricity is inconsistent across the country, as you can see from the satellite image. Only the elites in the capital of Pyongyang, which is that one bright dot, have it on a regular basis. While other regimes oppress dissidents and censor the internet, North Korea has no dissidents and has no internet. There's no publicly accessible internet. It is a black hole of information, and not just metaphorically. Here's a very recent graph from The Economist showing a couple more striking differences between the Koreas. So in the north, you can see that people are dramatically smaller and less healthy. You can look at the average height. You can look at the life expectancy. You can look at the calorie availability of people. What you can also see is that despite the fact that the north is so much poorer, I mean, look at the GDP and GDP per person. It's crazy. But look how much more militarized they are. Look how much more money the government spends on armed forces. Look how many atomic weapons the South has. None. Look how many the North has. 6 to 8. So, these infographics can sometimes shed some light on the situation as well. One of the ways that the Kims have been able to stay in power for so long is by building not just a police state, but also a cultural and emotional dictatorship. So any creative impulse or expression you might have, music, art, poetry, architecture, literature, must be done within a framework of praising the dear leader. So he's now Kim Jong-un today. So your job is now going to be judged on how creatively can you praise the dear leader. On state television, newspaper, and radio, which are the only legally available sources of information that the North Korean people have access to, the focus is the dear leader all the time. Where is he going? What is he doing? How lucky are we to have him? What is going to be his next great accomplishment? How can I help him? This regime has gone to more lengths to control information than any other government in the last 100 years. All foreign media is blocked to prevent North Koreans from learning about concepts like human rights and justice and equality. Children and students are brought up in this environment. When you're 6 or 7 years old, you know that there are lines that you can't step outside. When it comes to religion, worshiping anybody other than the Kims is illegal. So, for example, spreading Christianity is a political crime, and you'll get sent to a concentration camp for doing that. Owning a Bible can be punished by death. Any text that's not handed out by the dictatorship is considered subversive. So North Koreans are told from birth that they have nothing to envy. It's a very popular song that they all are forced to sing in school. But in reality, more than half of them live in extreme poverty. The entire system is held in place by, again, the world's most heavily militarized society. 1 in 5 adult men are active military troops. So each year, thousands of North Koreans risk their lives to try to get away from all of this by escaping over the country's northern border with China, across a river that's heavily patrolled by armed guards with shoot-to-kill orders. Pound for pound, the North Korean government is the closest thing we have to the Third Reich in our time. Last March, the UN even, which is comprised of dictatorships like China, for example, released a detailed report stating that the government's crimes against humanity have no parallel on Earth today. But this is not going to be a super dark talk, I promise. There's hope. There really is. This Orwellian state can't last forever. It's impossible. Change is happening at the grassroots level. So at the same time that the Kims are trying to hold their little fiefdom together, black markets and outside information and people are ripping it apart. So after the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, the North Korean government lost its greatest patron in terms of trade and aid. This led to a total economic collapse and a famine where up to 1 million people died in the late 90s, about 5% of the population. I mean, can you just imagine? That would be like 30 million 15 to 30 million people, depending on your numbers, in the United States. The regime forced everybody to call this horrific time the Arduous March. Those who survived were stunted. The Kim family may be well fed today, but because of malnutrition, the average 7-year-old North Korean boy is 8 inches shorter and 22 pounds lighter than their South Korean counterpart. China, which was once poorer than North Korea in the 60s and 70s, North Korea was way richer than China. Today, it's become such a marvel for the people living on the North Korean side at night to stare out at the Chinese side and see lights. They can't possibly imagine how people can have 24/7 electricity. So kind of out of this disaster of Soviet Union collapsing and the regime being unable to feed its people, North Koreans could no longer trust the state to provide for them. So in some ways, this border with China, which I show here, China on the left, North Korea on the right, became a weak spot for the government. Hunger drove people to search for new ways to survive outside the public distribution system. So they started buying and selling things illegally, including lots of food and goods and clothing from China. And black markets started to pop up across the countries. This was about 15 years ago. This started to happen quite frequently. The average annual income in North Korea became much higher than the average annual wage because everybody was buying or selling something on the side. And corruption, bribes, and breaking the law became a way of life. So as people created places outside of the regime's control, society became a lot more dynamic. There's more everyday disobedience in North Korea today than there was 15 years ago. And in the past decades, the market has become a central feature of any sort of North Korean village or town. So as people begin to rely on their fellow citizens for goods and services rather than the government, we get grassroots social change. And I like this graphic because it kind of neatly explains how dramatic the shift has been in the last 15 years, where people used to rely on the state for everything, and today they rely on each other for everything. So North Koreans born in the 90s have grown up with markets and outside information as like a basic part of their life, people who are 20, 30 years old today and younger. The obedience model has been totally shattered. So this younger generation also doesn't really have the same respect for the Kims as their parents did. Kim Jong-un is not even the firstborn son. He doesn't have the same gravitas anyway as the parents. And he's not portrayed as invincible. Even the regime propaganda talks about his health problems. That's not really something that a deity would have, right? So, soon enough, this informed what they call market generation is going to make up the majority of the North Korean population. Food and clothes are not the only thing that come in through these black markets. As you can see on the bottom there, information and technology from the outside world has also leaked in. So in 2015, today, North Korea is still the world's most closed media environment. But with an influx of cheap media, devices, content, and human traffic and interaction from China, the game is changing. So whereas once only a handful of government officials had access to modern communications about 10 years ago, it is now estimated that every North Korean household has at least one secret item, usually a radio or a TV, which is able to pick up South Korean or Chinese broadcasts of some kind. I wanted to show you this graph because it kind of depicts, what people have access to. A lot of people make fun of the efforts that we do to send information to North Korean people because they're like, they don't have TVs. Well, it's like actually, about a third of North Koreans have access to a TV. If not theirs, their families. And about half have access to a DVD player. And about half can listen to radio. So, the practice of sharing equipment and information is becoming a lot more common as like social trust builds. So when young people from the market generation watch illegal foreign media, they don't do it alone. They do it in small groups of 2 to 6 people. Social trust and what they call the sharing economy is growing, and it's laying the groundwork for basically an eventual civil society. So people are depending now more on with each other than on the state, and again, that's a dramatic, irreversible trend. So that's why right now we think is a sort of historic moment for the North Korean people. Outside information can have dramatic effects. One defector I know used to work for the government, and he was in charge of seizing foreign contraband. So he would go around to people's houses and confiscate stuff, like foreign books, movies, whatever. One day he came across a history book about Middle Eastern dictators. So like it was a book about Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, for example. He started reading about the abuse in those countries, and he knew that they were all friends of the Kims. And he started realizing that these things were happening in his country too. So, what he said is that this was the starting point of the logic shifting in his brain. He began to understand the nature of dictatorship. But to be honest, pop culture is way more spreadable and everywhere than scholarly works. According to defectors who escaped North Korea, TV shows and movies showing Western and South Korean pop culture are very, very popular inside North Korea today. So it's now cool to consume foreign media. The world depicted in these videos stands in really stark contrast to their everyday life. It shows a completely different reality than what's shown by the Kim regime. So when the Kim regime puts stuff on TV, they show America as this like burning parking lot, or South Korea as this terrible place that's a war zone. And they watch these sitcoms and dramas, and it's like people having tea and hanging out and just being chill basically. So I wanted to show you this video of a North Korean defector at a conference that I put together explaining how the movie Titanic changed her life.
I was able to connect with the film. It gave me a taste of freedom. It wasn't propaganda, but a story. People dying for love. A man willing to die for a woman. It changed my thinking. It changed the way I saw the regime and their endless propaganda. Titanic made me realize that I was controlled by the regime. I was not aware, like a fish is not aware of water. North Koreans are abducted at birth, so they don't know the concepts of freedom or human rights. They don't know that they are slaves.
So what Yeonmi is basically saying is very true, and there's a cover story in Wired that you should all pick up for April, and it talks about what I'm speaking to you about here, about how media and information is changing North Korea. And this, from a photo from that article, was what's called a no-tell. So this is what most people are digesting a lot of their foreign media on today. It's a small little DVD player. It costs about $60 to $100 in the black market. It's got a screen, it's got a USB port, it's got SD ports, and it's got a rechargeable battery. And the soap operas and movies that people are consuming on these things are making a dramatic impact. As one defector said, the kitchens with hot and cold tap water, people dating in a cafe, cars clogging streets, women wearing different clothes every day, it's completely different from what they're used to, right? So, it shows the daily comforts of life. And as another defector said, in North Korean movies, it's all about the state, the leader, the party, the state before love, the state before anything else. You should be ready to die for the leader. And in these dramas, it's totally different, right? So they find entirely new worlds there. A recent study by Seoul's National University, they sat down with 149 defectors and they talked to them about their experiences. Apparently 8 out of 10 had seen foreign soap operas and dramas from South Korea before they fled to the north. And if we start talking about Hollywood and Bollywood stuff that's popular there too, I bet that number creeps closer to 10 out of 10. So most of the people who flee North Korea today, one of their decisions was triggered by watching this foreign film. So one defector compared actually the USB sticks with the movies on them to taking the red pill from the Matrix. He said every day, as North Koreans are watching foreign media, they're beginning to question the reality and their government, and change inside North Korea is really becoming inevitable. So the aim of our North Korea program at the Human Rights Foundation is to help people like you and in other fields, technology, business, media, etc., connect with North Korean groups to come up with better ways of getting information inside their country. So to do that, we work directly with people who've escaped. And I wanted to show you some maps just so you can understand what that means. So to defect from North Korea, you have to cross the northern river border into China. So in the lower right, what's highlighted is called the Tumen River, and to its left is called the Yalu River. So this is where defectors escape and where the goods and services come in. In the lower left, I also show you an example of a border city. So it gives you an idea of how much interaction some of these people are having with Chinese people on a day-to-day basis. I mean, there are tons of bridges, there's sounds, you can see what's going on. The top photos show you in most places how the border is literally a river. And it may be guarded by troops, but at the same time, if you can make it across into China, you have a real chance to make it to freedom. So your goal now, once you've crossed over into China, is to make it to a South Korean embassy. If you get caught in China or another communist country like Vietnam or Laos, you can be repatriated and sent back to a prison camp or worse. So most defectors try to get either to Mongolia in the north or to Thailand or Cambodia in the south. Consider for a minute how ridiculous that is. I mean, it's thousands of miles by foot. So in the case of Mongolia, people are traversing the Gobi Desert, which is usually freezing. And in the case of Cambodia or Thailand, it means you basically go through what is basically a Chinese underground railroad system where you're hiding in people's homes and buying them off for months on end, until you end up in a place where you have to hike through a bunch of jungle to get to the next city. If you can finally make it to a South Korean embassy, they consider you a citizen, they fly you back to Seoul, and you get a period of debriefing and modern life training, and then they give you some money and set you free as a South Korean citizen. So there are about 27,000 of these people in South Korea today. Some have created organizations inside South Korea that focus on sending information into the north, and those are the people that we work with. So, they range from students, like the woman in the upper left who gave a talk at TED and was very famous for it, to the guy with glasses to the right of her, used to be Kim Jong-il's favorite poet, and he used to work and create propaganda for the regime. The guy to the right is the one we work with who floats balloons of information into North Korea. The man in the military fatigues is a former soldier who escaped, who now is like trying to co-opt other former soldiers to leaving. The man to the left of him is the most famous author from North Korea. He wrote what's basically the Gulag archipelago of North Korea. Yeonmi, you just saw, a young woman who's not only 21 years old, who's writing a book about her experiences. The man in the lower right is a former computer scientist who trained the hackers that did the Sony hack, according to him, back in the 90s. And this is a guy who's now trying to hack into the North Korean internet. So there's a lot of interesting people that we're working with. And they're very poorly funded, but they're very passionately devoted to their cause. They believe that information and education are the keys to a free North Korea. So our goal is to provide them with the technology, the know-how, and the support that they need. And I wanted to talk to you briefly about the three main ways that information gets into North Korea today. So some groups transmit shortwave radio broadcasts into North Korea. So they produce a mix of news and entertainment programming specifically for a North Korean audience. So the tunable radio itself, a very small tunable radio, is illegal in North Korea. But they're sent in, they're snuck in, they're purchased on the black market. And apparently about a third of the population, it's estimated, based on interviews with defectors, have listened to illegal foreign radio broadcasts. The second way is by smuggling stuff over the Chinese river border, as I showed before. So defector groups, brokers, traders, they all send food, goods, technology over the river. If you're in North Korea and your son escaped into South Korea and is having a wedding, you can pay to get photographs of his wedding. It's very expensive. It costs about $1,000 US, but basically the son gives the package to someone in South Korea, they take it to China, they give it to their broker friend, he sneaks it over the border, and it makes its way to your parents. So in that way, remittances are going back into North Korea, and about 25 million US dollars get into North Korea every year as families try to interact with their ones who they left behind. What's also really fascinating, if you think about it, cell networks on the northern border with China, if you get a Chinese phone, it still works on the North Korean side. So a lot of people who live in South Korea today still interact with their families. They call their families and they talk to them. They're careful about what they say, but people who live in the north of the country can speak to the outside world on cell phones. Basically, this is a photograph of broad daylight, someone about to cross the Yalu River with a bag of USB keys. And while some items can be stashed on boats and trucks and things like that, these guys just wade across. They float things over on tires. They'll even take a rock and attach a rope to it and throw it across. And then the other people pull it over and it's got a package of some kind on it. In the winter, when the river freezes over, which is 3 or 4 months out of the year, you can simply walk across. So transactions are coordinated at night with laser pointers, and Chinese officials on their side are bribed, and North Korean officials are bribed with cash, cigarettes, and liquor. So that's how contraband enters the country. And inside the country, these USB keys with information are very valuable. They're sometimes compared to gold. Sometimes smugglers can take things all the way to Pyongyang. Each year, defectors send in thousands of flash drives filled with everything from Schwarzenegger films to offline Wikipedias to democracy literature. So that's a very effective way of getting information across. The third way that they do it is by balloons. These are enormous hydrogen balloons, 30 to 40 feet tall, and they're filled with air, and they are released from South Korea when the winds are blowing north. So I've participated in a couple of these launches. It's an amazing thing to see. Basically, the balloons are attached to these big bags, and I have some of these for you guys. These are the leaflets that go in the bags. They're little waterproof pieces of plastic that depict the rulers of North Korea on one side and the rulers of South Korea on the other side, and they explain the difference between basically elections and not. Some of the other ones depict the income disparity, things like that. And the thing about sending stuff into North Korea, and I think this is very telling, it's a bag. Because they don't have bags in North Korea. So even just stuff you send in has to be useful, right? And the other thing that's kind of cool about this is it would be illegal to throw this away in North Korea because it has pictures of the Kims on it. So basically the soldiers that go to collect them have a decision to make. Obviously if you see one, it's dangerous to pick one up, but if you make that decision, that's one thing, but the soldiers are told, go clean these up or whatever. It's actually, they have to treat them carefully. So it's kind of funny in that way. But basically, The balloons, they carry not just these waterproof leaflets, but also DVDs, radios. They float north, and they have an acid timer that's attached to the top of the plastic bag. And after a couple hours, the acid eats through, the bag opens, and the stuff flies everywhere. And I wanted to show you footage from an actual launch we participated in.
But how do you support this effort where communication's prohibited? Enter the work of defectors like Park Sang-hak and his supporters at the Human Rights Foundation. Here, they're launching high-altitude balloons loaded with small radios, DVDs, and flash drives so they can send movies, Wikipedia, and educational material to the aid of those looking for information.
So, the government itself has tried to kill people like Park Sang-hak, who send information into the South. 3 years ago, they sent a secret agent to assassinate him with a poison-tipped pen. It was a really widely publicized thing. They failed. The people who are protecting Park Sang-hak and the secret police, they foiled the attempt. But the motivation is very clear. They're afraid of the truth. It is more powerful than any weapon could be, right? Information is power. According to one of the defectors that I've met with several times and that we work with, 30% of the North Korean population knows about the outside world. But he says if we can get that number to 50%, change will come. People will start demanding things of their government. And if that figure can reach 80 or 90%, then he says the current regime won't even be able to survive. So we in the outside world, at HRF, we believe that we haven't really even tapped our potential to assist the North Korean people. And this does not mean military intervention, which would be disastrous. This does not mean negotiations with the dictatorship, which have been completely useless and sometimes counterproductive. To us, the most effective way to bring change to North Korea is to help the people themselves, the defectors, bring technology and information to their countrymen. These efforts are creative, they're nonviolent, they're educational. Well, how can we help them? I think we can do that through media coverage, through financial support, and through technological advice. So I look forward to hearing your ideas in the Q&A. I mean, at HRF, we started to do a crowdfunding campaign. So we raised about $59,000 to help their efforts. So for $5, people could send in a DVD of a movie. For $20, they could send in a USB stick. It was pretty cool. We also did the first ever hackathon for North Korea in San Francisco last summer, where we brought 4 North Korean defectors to serve as judges and had about 100 engineers and software coders and people from all the tech companies come and just kind of brainstorm for a day. So here's some coverage from CNN that will explain it.
Well, last month, geeks collided with global policy once more. Hack North Korea, organized by the Human Rights Foundation, brought 100 engineers, coders, activists, investors, and designers together in San Francisco to answer one burning question. How can we get information into and possibly out of North Korea? The attendees divided into 8 groups judged by a panel that included North Korean defectors, refugees, and even a computer scientist who once trained the regime's cyber warfare unit. The winner? Tiny portable satellite receivers, so small and flat they could be hidden on the exteriors of North Korean homes. They would be smuggled in using balloons like these or across the Chinese border and would pull in English and Korean language stations from a South Korean broadcaster. Think of it as airdropping a different kind of weapon, knowledge.
So what were some of the winning ideas that he didn't really get into? Some of them were stealth USB keys. Some of them were the portable satellite receivers that he mentioned. Others were information hidden inside video games, Raspberry Pi, Wi-Fi, sort of daisy chains, GPS trackers for balloons. Even slingshots were discussed. Yes, slingshots. So consider that in most places the river border with China is pretty narrow. I mean, some people at the hackathon thought they were pretty silly ideas, but honestly the defectors thought it was awesome. And these things, you can buy them for $30 on Amazon, and they can fling stuff hundreds of feet. So when we visited Seoul in January, about 2 months ago, we walked into one of our partners' offices, and he's got this gigantic slingshot thing, and he says, "Oh, we've been sending stuff over like this. This is awesome." So basically, it's cool to see that they've implemented some of these ideas, and we want to do more of it. This trip that I went on 2 months ago, we brought Vice with us. They filmed a mini documentary. It's coming out Friday. I'll make sure that Kate can share it with you guys. You can also read about our work on the cover story of Wired and Wired UK. Both, if you go to Barnes & Noble next week, they'll both be out, the April editions. One thing that on everybody's minds, obviously, is this whole thing about the interview, right? So this spring, we are indeed, yes, we're working with defector groups to smuggle James Franco's movie into the country. So to give you some context, in the black markets, it's been reported by a Defector organization that a copy of the interview is 10 times as valuable as a copy of any other movie. And the North Korean regime, again, according to Defector reports, has assigned a 3-star general to make sure that the movie doesn't get in the country. So why the curiosity from the people and the fear from the regime over such a kind of silly movie? I mean, I liked it, but it's a slapstick comedy. Well, in January, I got to pose this question to this guy named Jin Sung, who is one of the highest level defectors to have ever escaped. He used to be Kim Jong-il's favorite poet. His job was to actually create propaganda material. So he was in the sort of psychological warfare division of North Korea. And he said the movie is more powerful than an atomic weapon. He actually said it's more scary to the regime. You know, I asked him, what's the thing that the regime would fear most about the people learning? And he said, anything that would put a dent in the deification and worship of the Kim family. So we're going to hear from a North Korean who, we sat a North Korean down, we watched the movie with him, and he gave us his thoughts. So we're going to listen to him.
Oh, excuse me.
Did you just shark?
No, I did. It was the dead camera guy.
그 사실은 잘 모르겠지만 그 사실이라면 난 또 이제 그 사실이라고 이제 믿을 수밖에 없어요. 왜 그러냐면 저도 놀랐어요. 맨날 미국에서 처음에 이제 김정은 암살과 그 관련한 이제 인터뷰 영화가 나왔다는.
Do you think that your people should be rewarded for their resilience and strength?
Of course, Dave.
Then why don't you feed them?
할 때 가장 놀랐어요. 그러니까 역시 북한 사람들은 놀랄 만한 하나의 사건이에요, 이게 영화가. 왜 그러냐면 그 역대에도 김일성, 김정일, 김정은에 대한 그 3대 세습하는 그 자들에 대한 그 뭔가 하면 이름이나 그들의 신상 정보나 하나의 신적 존재를 그들의 이름 함부로 제대로 부를 수 없던 북한 사람들이 완전 신처럼 이제 절대화하고 이렇게 이제 경배하고 이제 받들어 모시던 저.
So you can see the impact that even comedy movies can have in a place like North Korea. So I guess the question is, how can people here and elsewhere accelerate grassroots change? By giving them information. So there's limited power, I've heard some defectors say, in telling the world about how bad things are in North Korea. I think it's important. I think we have to continue to do that. But if we can tell North Koreans about the world, that's more important. That's where change is going to come. And the possibilities are pretty limitless. What's really important is that all of these groups need design help in one way or another. Actually, you know, that's why I was excited to come talk to you guys. If any of you are interested in talking to these groups and learning from them, obviously all their websites are en masse and they could use help in different ways. Not only strategic thinking, but also, you know, graphic design, visuals, things like that. So if any of you are interested in helping out them, let me know. I could put you in touch. There are dozens of groups. They all need help. We've partnered with institutions before. I show this. This was a trip we made to the Wikimedia Foundation with one of our defector friends. You know, we'd love to get you guys involved too. The resources and skill sets in this room obviously are superb, so we invite you to work with us to maybe, let's bring a delegation of people to New York. We can talk to them about their programs, about their thinking, about what they're doing. Consider some of this art. I mean, some of you who are artists, this is art that Wired produced for its cover story. It's pretty cool, and I think it can kind of inspire people. And this is obviously, you know, the USBs crossing the river, and here are the balloons. You know, the more people that are skilled that can get involved and help tell this story, I think we can get a lot of traction. Beyond that, I'd love to do more meetups, hackathons, things like that. We can always curate a trip to Seoul too. In the meantime, if you're interested in learning more, the best thing I can do is to tell you to read books. Here are some awesome books that are great places to start. If you're just going to pick one, I would start with Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. It's kind of like a incredible series of chapters where she spends years interviewing different North Koreans, and she kind of captures their most amazing stories in one place. Dear Leader is a great account of the man I talked about, Jin Sung, and it's his story of escaping and when he realized he had to leave and his whole crazy escape through China. Without You, There Is No Us is pretty interesting. It's from a Korean-American author who went and taught Pyongyang's elites for a year inside North Korea. The Orphan Master's Son is fiction. It won the Pulitzer, though, and some people have said it actually probably connotes what it feels like to live in North Korean more than any nonfiction book. Escape from Camp 14 and Aquariums at Pyongyang are both pretty riveting accounts of defectors who spent time in concentration camps and escaped and lived to tell about it. So, you know, with that, I thank you for having me here, and maybe we can have a conversation or whatever you guys are interested in. I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks. And I have leaflets for you guys, so make sure to grab your leaflets.